Back for another edition of In the Huddle, guys. Carl Dukes put them up, along with my man Jason Locke on 4. Of course, Brian Baldinger, part of this podcast as well. Today, as we continue our preview, we are now into mandatory mini camps, which means we're just a few weeks away from the start of training camp in late July. And we're taking a look at various divisions, guys, pretty much all of them as we move through this. And today we're going to take a look at the AFC South. The interesting thing is I'm only interested in this division for the most part, Jason, because of the quarterbacks. All 4 quarterbacks are 25 or younger. We're, of course, talking about C.J. Stroud, Trevor Lawrence, Anthony Richardson, and Will Levis. So this division from a quarterback standpoint could either be really interesting or not, because we're still trying to figure out if Richardson can do what he did in the limited time we saw him, if C.J. Stroud can come back and build on what he did last year, if Will Levis is truly going to be a franchise guy for the Titans. And Trevor Lawrence, it's year 4. It's go time for him. So I want to start there. Does any one of these quarterbacks, right, have what it takes to make you feel like, yes, these guys will be at a top level? I feel good about C.J. Stroud. I just don't know what to think about Trevor Lawrence right now.
I don't either. We had this stretch of games from the middle of 2022 through that, game at Arrowhead that they really could have won in the postseason, where Trevor Lawrence was fulfilling the prophecy. It was everything you could want out of a 1-1. He was the best player on a surging team, week in, week out for, including the playoffs, about a 10-week stretch. He made all the throws he should make. He made the layups and he made the reverse slam dunks. They were a very difficult offense to defend, and he could really feature anybody seemingly in that offense at any given time. I mean, Zay Jones was a thing, you know what I mean? Like it wasn't just about, your number one guy. That's sort of an anomaly though, right? There's another stretch of games buffering that on either side before it and then last season after it, where we can talk about injuries, we can talk about offensive line, but he looked like a guy who either tried to do too much or not enough. He was either pressing and had too much of a sense of urgency, or at times, to me, I'm watching them in the second half and I'm thinking, where is that urgency? Like, do you realize how down you are? Like, are you understanding sort of the magnitude of this situation? Because, like, this season is slipping away from you guys, and I don't really know who's pumping the brakes on that. And I get it. Again, some issues on defense, certainly. But they just look like a team that was content to hand the ball off to Travis Etienne a whole bunch of times, even though it was going nowhere. And so it just felt a little sort of casual to me. So, it's a huge season, Carl. I think the question is, like, because how much they have invested in him and because it is so hard to get a top-notch quarterback in this league, do they just pay him anyway? Do they just sort of look at that 10-week sample size and say, hey, if he did that for 10 weeks 2 years ago, he could do it for 20 weeks this year, and that's growth, and that's maturity, and that's another year in Doug Peterson's system and all that stuff. Personally, it just hasn't looked like how I thought it would look. And, at times it's reading defense. At times it's not leaning into his legs as much as he should. At times it's certainly the system not putting him in the best positions to succeed. There's a ton of physical talent there, and he's obviously an incredibly sharp kid. But I don't know about you. I maybe to say I have, like, he's clearly a starting quarterback in this league, but I have reservations about clumping him in the top 10, let alone the top 5.
Yeah, this is why this division is so intriguing and interesting. Let's start with the Texans just as a team. Obviously, they add Stefon Diggs. They go out and grab Joe Mixon at running back. And for the Texans, the crazy thing for me is you look at all these weapons and what C.J. Stroud did with the guys he had last year, and Tank Dell and Nico Collins, and all of those guys are back. John Minchie, who I don't even know what he's going to look like. Remember, he's recovering from cancer, and he's removed from that, I think, a couple of years now. And so hopefully we'll get a chance to see more of him. But it's not about the wide receiving core. The crazy thing about the Texans, Jason, is they had one of the best offensive lines. They protected this kid. I mean, C.J. Stroud now has more weapons, and the O-line was top 10, in the league. It wasn't one of the best. I think the Eagles, Lions, and Ravens and Colts, who we'll talk about, all had better offensive lines. But his release and getting rid of the football as quickly as he did also helped him stay not on the ground. And so I look at this Texans team and I go, all right, they made the playoffs last year. Now there's an expectation. I love Dalton Schultz at tight end.
Yep.
There's a lot here to be excited about for the Houston Texans, who are, by the way, favored to win this division again.
Yeah. My concerns with them aren't really endemic to like them and their specific personnel. It's more just sort of how the league works and how difficult it is to get better year after year. And like, I've just seen so many teams that sort of win the offseason, and it just doesn't, for whatever reason, play out
translate
the way they would have liked. And last year, right, doesn't buy you this year. And the magic carpet ride that you were on last year, when you put the footballs down for 6.5 months and then pick them back up in September, you don't always pick up where you left off. I can't sit here and say I disagree with what Nick Caserio did, or I think they're trying too hard or doing too much. They're doing what they should be doing. They're trying to put the best team possible around this quarterback while he's making, pennies on the dollar. It just doesn't always work out. And so that's sort of my fear is just young team in year two. Are they able to pick up where they left off? Do the weight of expectations weigh them down a little bit? There's regression and just bad luck that can just be inherent in this league, with injuries. So they're a fascinating team, but they should be better offensively and they should be better defensively. Like, at least when you look at that roster, year two with that coaching staff. And the quarterback he did things that rookie quarterbacks don't really do in this league. And I remember, they opened with the Ravens and coming away from that game thinking, man, this kid's way further along than I probably thought. And a few people in the scouting community who told me like, he's the one. I'm like, those guys were right. Like those guys, like that's a viable football team right now. Like that team's going into week 2 and like, I don't even care who they're playing. Like they can probably make that a game. So, I mean, look, on paper, they're the best team in that division. Like, I think D'Amico Ryans has clearly built the culture that, people are always talking about in this league and aspiring to. But I don't know, Carl. I just feel like it's tough, man. It's tough to take it to another notch 2 or 3 straight years when you've only been in the league a year or two. So I'll be fascinated to see how they develop. But I mean, I think they're a tough out, like I think they're for real. They've got, you look at, they got a quarterback, they got an O-line, they got weapons on offense.
They got an edge rusher.
They got an edge. They got a stud pass rusher. They got a stud corner.
Yep.
Like the head coach appears to be a stud, and he came from a winning program, and he played the game himself at an incredibly high level. And he has ties to that organization. Like being in Houston matters to him. I don't know, man. They certainly seem to check a lot of boxes.
They do. Over under 9.5 for the Houston Texans. It's in the huddle, guys. Subscribe, like us, and follow us as well wherever you get your podcast. Again, Baldy, also a part of this podcast, along with Jason La Canfora. We bring it to you each and every week, and we talk nothing but the NFL. Here's what's interesting, and I got to mention this before we move on. Is Stefon Diggs going to trip, Jason? Is he going to act up and disrupt what could be? Because let's be honest, he wasn't, a saint when he was in
No.
Buffalo, right? I mean, this is part of why they wanted to move on from him. And I think they gave him up for nothing. And if he plays up to his capability, forget about it, because that's going to be a problem for a lot of teams trying to defend CJ and Steph. But is he going to act right, as we like to say?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think he certainly became a disruptive force in Buffalo, and they reached a point where the social media stuff, like his sins are menial, not cardinal. Like,
correct.
A lot of it was more of the passive aggressive variety than of the complete outward subterfuge, right?
Right.
I don't think it was a mutiny. Maybe it was a little bit of a soft coup. So, and he's a smart guy, and he knows where he's going, and all the weapons that you talked about, he's aware of. So, I have to think he understands that, like, this is more about rehabilitating sort of his image and getting back to being part of an ascending winning program and helping a team win a football game and chasing a ring than it is about him going somewhere where he's going to be force-fed the ball, right? And he might have amazing fantasy football numbers, but a lot of it's in garbage time. But that's going to help him go out into the market a year from now, and get more money. Like, it's not going to be that latter situation. It's going to be that first one. And as long as he and his wallet are comfortable with that, and it's about making 2 or 3 plays a game that help us win. It's not about, hey, you might get 8 of the 10 targets on this drive, and we're just going to try to exploit this matchup, or just give you jump balls. That's not what this is going to be. But because they have 2 kids who can take the top off of defense, and because at times it looked like last year that Stroud could just throw it 8 straight times at the Tank Dell, and he'll probably come down with it. That's going to open things up for Stefon Diggs as well. So I just think it's about a guy like D'Amico Ryans, again, who played in the league, like having an open dialogue with him and just, reassuring him that you're going to get yours. But in this whole tapestry, you're one, you're one cloth. You're not the main thing. Like, that's not what they need. That's not what they're buying at this stage of his career. And there's no going back to the past. Your prime was your prime. Stefon Diggs 2, 3, 4 years ago. Like, that dude, we can grieve for him, but he's not coming back. That's not who you are anymore, and that's not who we need you to be here.
I agree. It's going to be interesting. We're taking a look at the AFC South. Let's talk about the Colts, because I think they're the next interesting team in this division.
Yeah.
They add A.P. Mitchell, Anthony Gold, right? Flacco's there now, right? They let Gardner Minshew go. Flacco's there. And here's the thing for me with the Colts. Their running game with Richardson, who's got to learn to get down and get out of bounds, but their running game with Jonathan Taylor, who looked good at the end of the season, this could be a dangerous team. And we mentioned this, Jason. They got a really good offensive line. I mean, Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, they got some wide receivers. I feel like this is a team that might be on the come if Richardson can stay healthy.
Yeah, I mean, every year there's a couple of teams that exceed expectations in each conference, and sort of the team that came from nowhere. This could be it. I'm really intrigued by the Indianapolis Colts. I'm really intrigued by Anthony Richardson. The schedule sets up pretty well for them, and they did win a lot of football games with Gardner Minshew last year, and we're in a lot of football games with Gardner Minshew. Even some of the ones they lost, I go back to that Browns game where there was weird calls. Like, they could have been even better than they were, despite, not unlike sort of the Texans not being on that magic carpet ride. So,
Jason, you know what that told me, though, and we can talk about this separately, but Shane Steichen gets it. He knows what he's doing. To your point, because of how they played without those key pieces, they were competitive. It's not like they freaking fell apart,
No. No, and it wasn't woe for me, and it wasn't the season's lost. And remember that, and you said it, Richardson's got to be his own best advocate out there on the field and realize that this ain't the NCAA. Even very early on, you like there were drives where you're like, wow, that's a really interesting sort of offense. And that, that as those kids grow together, that's going to be like, how do you sort of defend this and that? Richardson at times in the red zone is just a force of nature. So I don't know, Carl, like very intrigued by them. I feel like they're kind of built for that track that they play on a little bit. We saw Pittman take it to another level. I think they're going to have to continue to have people pop for them offensively. I want to see somebody emerge there because Richardson's got such a big arm. Pittman's going to move the chains. He's like an Anquan Bolden type, but like I want to see a real deep threat emerge for them. But I think, man, when you can play bully ball and you can just keep it away from the other team like that, that works, man. That works. Like DeForest Buckner still got something left in the tank. They kind of reshuffled their linebackers on the fly last year, and I really like the results of that. The back end, started to show some progress. Why not? I mean, why aren't the Colts a team that surprises people this year? I'm buying. Like, if Anthony Richardson can stay healthy and stay under center, like I'm buying it. And if he goes down for a month, I'm buying Flacco for a 4 to 6 week sample size. Now, if Flacco's got to do what Gardner Minshew did last year, that's going to like he's going to run out of steam after a couple of months. Like you're not going to be able to ride him for 3 months like you did Minshew last year. But if it's 3 to 5 weeks in the middle of the season, I think they can sustain.
8.5 over/under for the Colts. I actually have them going over. I think they're a 9 or 10 win team if all of this plays out like Jason is talking about. Here's the other part that you got to realize, and whether you buy into the PFF rankings, they do their analytics. Best offensive lines last year: Eagles, Lions, Ravens, Colts. And you're talking about Quentin Richardson, who's one of the best, or Quentin Nelson, should I say, Ryan Kelly, Braden Smith. They've got some guys, man, on that offensive line, to your point about bully ball. So run the ball, control the clock, right? Play action, allow Richardson to set him up for success. And I think Shane Steichen, again, I think he showed his play calling ability and being able to handle all of this last year, where if he gets these pieces back, they're going to be dangerous. Guys, we're taking a look at the AFC South. We talked about Trevor Lawrence. Let's talk about what they added in Jacksonville, Jason. Gabe Davis is now there. They added Javon Foster, offensive lineman. They needed to bolster that offensive line. Ridley's gone. We know that. We'll talk about him with the Titans in just a minute. But Christian Kirk is coming back off of IR, so they get him back. Is this a better team than what they were last year? Now, we spent a little time, obviously, on Trevor Lawrence, but what about the other parts of this team? Here's what's interesting. Trevor Lawrence was the least blitzed quarterback in the NFL in 2023. 20.4% blitz rate. Defenses, for the most part, Jason, were only sending 4 guys. But yet, he was injured. He was running around. He wasn't the best. So, I mean, I think to this development thing you're talking about with Lawrence not seeing the field some of the times, this speaks to it. It wasn't as if they were getting after him with 6 or 7 guys and bringing the house. Least blitz quarterback in the NFL in 2023.
Yeah, I just there's part of me that kind of wonders if they had their moment, they had their window. It was a couple years ago, and that's most of the time they're the Jacksonville Jaguars, and at once Bortles had his moments, and this kid is better than Bortles, and I don't want to equate this to what a debacle that was, but like this is a team who once every 5 or 6 years kind of puts it together for a period of time, but is anything really sustainable there? Like, I just have a hard time buying them. I don't know that there's still enough bite defensively. I feel like they probably got cute with a couple of draft picks on defense. That's going to end up holding them back over time. Like, I don't know, Carl. I just have a hard time looking at them in a conference this tough. Like, if they were in the NFC, there's one of those teams where I think they could get hot for 5 or 6 weeks, and then that, a fast start could probably carry them. And yeah, they're playing in the least division of that conference, but I don't know. I think people have kind of caught them. You know what I mean? Like, I think Houston's caught them. I think the Colts might catch them. Like, they don't just dominate the division the way you think they would. Like, there's certain teams that they just sort of struggle with, no matter, what the records are. I think Doug Peterson's feeling the heat a little bit. And, is that going to bring out the best in him? I don't know that general manager and that head coach, if they had anything to say about it, would pick the other guy. I think it's always been a little bit of an odd coupling for me. And the longer we go without them sustaining things makes me sort of wonder, like, that's been a toxic building at many times in the past. And we get focused on, like, the extreme of it, right? Like, we get focused on, like, the Urban Meyer of it, but they had issues but stuff going on there forever. I just, from the owner on down, man, I don't know. I don't think that them coming into the season this way after last year being the debacle that it was, or a step back, maybe debacle is too strong of a word. I don't know that the confluence of these events is going to bring out the best in this group. I just don't.
Brian Thomas Jr., wide receiver out of LSU. They drafted him. He's 6'2", 210, ran a 4.3. The reason I bring that up is because they lose Calvin Ridley, but they feel like they've replaced him, obviously, with Gabe Davis and, bringing in Brian or drafting Brian Thomas Jr. So they have speed. I don't know what that connection will be like, but I agree with you. It's not necessarily the players. I look at their roster, Jason, and I go, okay, Cam Robinson, I'm looking at their O-line, right? I'm looking at Brandon Schiff. I'm going, they have some really good players, but why hasn't this come together? And that is the concern for me, is this meshing of the talent. And to your point, are the general manager and the head coach, everybody talks about this synergy and being on the same page, and it's a collective effort and all this crap we hear all the time. But then you say, okay, well, then why isn't it coming together? So I think for them this season, and two things will happen. One, Trevor Lawrence will ball out. They'll go to playoffs, and everybody will say, okay, we told you so. Yeah. Or that doesn't happen, and Peterson potentially gets fired because of the ownership, to your point. Maybe they change general managers, and maybe they don't end up extending, Trevor Lawrence, because it's a blank show. And if that plays out, then Jacksonville is in a bad place, because this is supposed to be a trend where we get to year 3 and 4 with Trevor Lawrence, and all of a sudden now we're the perennial playoff team. When he got drafted, guys, people said he was the best prospect since Andrew Luck.
Yes.
Okay? He's not.
Sure thing.
He's not. He hasn't been that. No. Yes. So that's what's crazy when you start talking about Trevor Lawrence. This is not Jason and I over, selling this. The best quarterback prospect since Andrew Luck. And people forget, Colts lost or moved on from Peyton Manning. Luck stepped in. They went to the playoffs immediately. Like, there was no fall off. And so I just feel like I haven't felt that way about Trevor Lawrence. So we will see. Are they the third or fourth best team in this division? Jason, I right now I think they're probably the third best team, because the Titans, I need to see what happens with their new coach and system and all of that stuff. But let's shift gears and talk about the Titans here. Guys, it's In the Huddle. This is our podcast. Make sure you check us out on YouTube, all social media platforms, and subscribe to In the Huddle Pod. All right, last but not least, as we look at this division, let's take a look at this team that I think also has a lot of potential. But I need to see what this coaching staff is going to look like. They had Calvin Ridley. We're talking about the Titans, guys. Obviously, Will Levis got the start. He threw 4 touchdowns in his opening game, and everybody went, oh, and then it kind of fell off, right? So he looked average by the end of the season. They lose Derrick Henry. We know that. Jason, we've talked about it with the Ravens as they add Derrick Henry. They added Tony Pollard, though. So from the Cowboys, Pollard comes over. So offensively, I'm looking at this team, and I'm going, all right, are they better than they were at the end of last season? How do you view this? Michael Pittman, by the way, got a 3-year, $23 million deal with the Colts. Ridley got 4 years, $23 million per with the Titans. And this is how this division has kind of shifted when you talk about these wide receivers and the money that's being thrown around. But what do you think about the Titans?
I don't think much. I got to be honest. I think this was the team that for years played over their head. And maybe I'm a dinosaur. Maybe I'm old school. But I think Mike Vrabel had something to do with that, man. I think he instilled a chip in their shoulder that every year when people were ready to write them off or, they've got to go to Arrowhead with their third-string quarterback or they've got to play a team like the Baltimore Ravens who in 2019, remember, you want to talk about teams of destiny, like Lamar's rookie year as a starter, first full season, right? And they damn near run the table, and it's the greatest running offense we've ever seen. And then Tennessee comes to Baltimore and knocks them out in the first playoff game. Like, I don't know, man. Like, I think he had a lot to do with this team, seemingly to me, perpetually punching above their weight class. And especially when they faced elite teams, like they knew how to play the Chiefs, they knew how to play the Ravens, they knew how to play the Bengals. They could give those teams games at a time when you had to go through those quarterbacks if you thought you were going to do anything in the playoffs. Like, they won a lot of games with Ryan Tannehill. Like, let's not try to pretend that it looked great because they asked him to do what he does best, right? Hand the ball off to Derrick Henry and throw deep play action, accurate passes. But, like, that's part of that. That's on them. Like, they found a guy who Miami couldn't wait to kick out of the building and were threatening to go to the Super Bowl with him a couple of times. Vrabel's not there anymore. Like, I love the fact that Brian Callahan is bringing his dad, Bill, with him. But, like, are they going to be able to run the ball with Tony Pollard the way they need to? Like, you look at Bill Callahan's history in this league, and he's a savant with offensive lines and the run game. But, like, do they have the personnel to be that kind of team? I don't buy the quarterback. I just don't. He may prove me wrong, but I'm very skeptical that Will Levis is going to still be there if or when they ever turn this thing around. I don't know, Carl. I have a hard time. I have a hard time buying them. And it's odd to me. Like, I look at what they did this offseason, which seemed to me to be trying to stick a lot of electrical tape on holes. Like, they seem to be very into, like, let's just buy everything, like, at close to the top tier of the market, like not resetting the market, but like, let's try to do as much C+ to B+ moves we can make financially to, like, be better than middling next year, to try to be able to, like, compete for a wild card, or, if Houston takes a step back, maybe we're around there. But I'm just not buying a lot of those moves long term. Like, I'm not buying that it's really going to make a difference. And, like, I juxtapose that to, like, what Seattle did with their young head coach, which was like, hey, Rome wasn't built in a day. We're not going to sign a bunch of dudes who we probably want to cut 9 months from now. You know what I mean? Because we think they might help us win 1 or 2 more games in the short term, right? We're going to really holistically look at this whole thing. And Seattle's in the NFC, where you've got a hell of a lot more opportunity to catch lightning in a bottle, right, than in the AFC, where it's so top-heavy. So I don't know, man. I kind of don't buy it. Like, I don't really. I'm surprised they didn't take more of a long view. Now, I also think I understand why they didn't, the GM's under pressure. Like, he won the power struggle with Vrabel, but now it's like, okay, well, up until a year and a half ago, you won a hell of a lot of games with Vrabel, including a lot of games people didn't think you were going to win. So you better do something out of the gate. I don't know, man. I think they're going to be kind of caught in between, and it will come down to the quarterback. And I think Brian Callahan, has a worthy resume to get a chance to work with this kid. But I think there's some inherent limitations there that I just think it's going to be too much feast and famine. For every amazing deep ball he throws, I think there's going to be 2 or 3 decisions you're going to look at and be like, ooh.
So there's a lot there with the Titans. It's just, the uncertainty. And I want to say this before we let go here and get out of here, guys. Make sure you subscribe. We're going to continue to break down the divisions, talk more about what's going on around the National Football League here over the next few weeks. But the Titans, everybody talks about this run game just real quick, Jace. Yeah, they added Tony Pollard. Yeah, they went out and got, Ty J. Spears, who's there. Their offensive line was terrible. Yeah. And I don't think we can look at this and say, yeah, it's Will Levis when they can't protect him and they weren't able to run the football effectively. Guys, again, PFF, last offensive line, worst offensive line in the National Football League last year. So that's got to get better. They did
go out Bill Callahan, right? I mean, that's Bill
that's
Callahan.
Right.
I mean, that's like, but does that happen in one offseason?
No. That's the thing.
That's sort of where I am with it. So if that's going to take some time, why are we doing all these other sort of, like Calvin Ridley? Like I don't feel like ownership and management took true stock of just how big and long the chore was. I think this was more short-term stuff, like putting lipstick on a pig a little bit. Rather than really gutting that thing, right? Rather than really gutting that thing and saying, okay, might be a little tougher to evaluate Will Levis because of it, but is Will Levis really going to be transcendent enough that we're going to lock into him year 2 anyway? I don't
know. No. Listen, over under 6.5 for the Titans. We like the Texans. We think the Colts are on the come. The Jags have to figure it out. And I think the Titans are going to be last in this division when it's all said and done. And again, we'll get to camp. We'll see how this thing looks. But guys, we're giving you our preview, and we'll continue to do this in the next week and through the rest of the offseason leading into the start of training camps in July. So we have a lot to look forward to. Follow Jason La Canfora. Follow my man Brian Baldinger as well. Follow me on social media and stay up with everything that's going on in the National Football League. It's in the Huddle. Thank you guys for being here. Jason, man, have a great day.
You too, brother.